Welcome, Wapham crew, new listeners, and whoever else may be joining us this evening. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Saturday, February 4th, Sunday, February 5th for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm so glad you guys could join us this evening. I hope you guys are nice, cuddly, warm. The weather's been so up and down, it's a bit bipolar. There's the Siberian Express, but it feels a lot more like the Bipolar Express, if you ask me. So I'm your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. I'm so glad once again that you could join us wherever you may be in the world out there, whether you're listening to us live or you may be listening to us as a replay. It's perfectly fine. So if you're listening to us live right now, you may be listening to us on Facebook. We're also on YouTube as well as Twitch. KPNL Radio, which you can find on KPNL Radio at kpnl-bb.com. You may also find us on eTalk Radio, which you can find on etalk.tv/radio. If you want to listen to us in your free time, whether you're working it, or working out, make sure that you tune in to us once more under We Are Paradox Media at Spreaker, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Castbox, Tumblr, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser, and Podvine. Please mosey on over to our YouTube. I thought we were grounded for a lot longer than we were, as in the past, when we do get grounded from YouTube, it actually lasts quite a while. But this time, I looked into it this weekend on my email, and it actually said that it was only a week. So I was able to relink that here to the Spreaker, and then reform that through our StreamYard to where the video and the audio goes over there. So enjoy. So bummer news, our guest tonight, Miss Mama Mary, she was not able to join us as she has a family outing that she was attending. I hope she enjoys it. Family comes first. And so we have her rescheduled for this next coming month on the 18th. But we have a ton of epic other shows coming up here in the near future. So tonight, as per any time we have a guest cancel, or just sometimes on Saturdays or Sundays, we will just do this story time. I really do tend to enjoy it, and I hope you do as well. All right, so we are going to continue, and we'll be ending on this Real Hauntings by Mr. Hans Holzer. This is one of my inheritance from my grandpa. I was really surprised when I discovered that he actually was into the paranormal, and we had a couple discussions before he passed about the paranormal, and I thought it was just curiosity because, he was in that latter age and he was about to pass, but come to find out, he had quite a healthy collection of books. So I'm grateful that I received them. All right. So we ended on The Phantom Boy of Santa Ana, and I was tempted to go back, but I think we shall continue on this. If you missed the last show, make sure you go back. It's the story time with TessaTNT that was previous to this one, but yes, I hope you enjoy. So I wondered about the name Peter Fairley, of course. I did not expect to find the boy listed somewhere, but was there a Fairley family in these parts in 1925? There was. In the Santa Ana County Directory's SW section for the year 1925, there is a listing for a Frank Fairley, carpenter, at 930 W. Bishop, Santa Ana. The listing continues at the same address the following year also. It was not in the 1924 edition of the directory, however, so perhaps the Fairleys were new to the area then. At the outset of the visit, Mrs. Leake had mentioned a Felix connected with the area. Again, consulting the county directories for 1925, we found several members of the Felix family listed. Andre Felix, rancher at Golden West Avenue and Bolsa Chica Road, Post Office, Westminster. Adolph and Miguel Felix, laborers at the same address, perhaps brothers, excuse me, and Florentino Felix, also a rancher at a short distance from the farm of an Andre Felix. The listing also appears in 1926. No Vincent or Vincente, however, but of course not all members of the family need to have been listed. The directories generally list only principals, that is, those gainfully employed or owners of business or property. Then again, there may have been 2 hired hands by the name of Vincent, was a given name rather than a Christian name. In 1911, History of Orange County by Samuel Armour described the area as consisting of a store, church, school, and a few residences only. And I did forget something. We gotta have our creeper music. Bring in the creeper. Turn this back down to about 52 looks good. All right. Let's carry on, shall we? So the 1911 History of Orange County by Samuel Armour described the area as consisting of a store, church, school, and a few residences only. It was then called Bolsa, and the main area was used as ranch and stockland. The area abounds in fish hatcheries also, which were started around 1921 by a Japanese named Kiyama. Thus was explained the existence of water holes in the area along with fish tanks as well as natural lakes. With the help of Mrs. Coons, I came across still another interesting record. According to the Los Angeles Times of January 22, 1956, an ancient residence at 14611 Golden West Street, Westminster, built 85 years ago, was razed for subdivision. This was undoubtedly the farm residence and land on which the development we had been investigating was later built. And there we have the evidence. 3 names were given by our psychic friend, Felix, Vincent, and Peter Fairley. 2 of them are found in the printed record, with some difficulty and with the help of local researchers familiar with the source material, which neither Mrs. Leake nor I had access to prior to the visit to the haunted house. The body of the woman could easily have been disposed of without leaving a trace by dumping it into one of the fish tanks or other water holes in the area, or perhaps in the nearby Santa Ana River. About a month after our investigation, the Troush family moved back to Huntington Beach, leaving the Westminster house to someone else who might someday appear on the scene. But Carol Troush informed me that for the moment of our investigation onward, not a single incident had marred the peace of their house. So I can only assume that Sybil and I were able to help the 2 unfortunate ghosts out into the open. The boy, too, find his parents, no doubt also on his side of the veil, and the woman to find peace and forgiveness for her negligence in allowing the boy to be killed. It is not always possible for the psychic investigator to leave a haunted house free of its unseen inhabitants, and when it does happen, the success is its own reward. Let me fix this real quick. Chapter 25, Mr. Wasserman's Ghost. One wouldn't think a brand new modern home perched on a hill at Millbrae a sunny little town outside of San Francisco, could harbor a poltergeist case, one of those sinister disturbances, usually Germanic, involving a teenager or otherwise emotionally unabsorbed person in the household of the living. Poltergeist only means noisy ghost, and a ghost it is. The youngster is not playing any pranks. The youngster is being used to play them by a disturbed person no longer in possession of a physical body. I heard of the Millbrae case from a young girl who used to live in that house before she decided she was old enough to have a place of her own and consequently moved out to a nearby town called Burlingame. Jean Grosso has a high school education and a big curiosity about things she cannot explain, such as ESP. In 1964, she had an experience that particularly upset her because it did not fit in with the usual experiences of life she had been taught in school. She was in bed at the time, just before falling asleep, or as she put it, so poetically, just before the void of sleep engulfs you. Miss Grosso is not at a loss for words and is as bright a young girl as you want to meet. Her world is very real to her and has little or no room for fantasies. Still, there it was. Something prevented her from giving in to sleep. Before she knew what she was doing, she saw her own bare feet moving across the floor of her bedroom. She grabbed the telephone receiver and blurted into it, "Jeannie, what's wrong? Did you get hurt?" The telephone had not rung, yet her best friend, who was almost like a sister to her, was on the line. She had been in an automobile accident in which she had been run off the road and collided with a steel pole, but except for being shook up, she was all right. What made Jean Grosso jump out of a warm bed to answer the phone that had not rung yet, to speak by name to someone who had not yet said hello, and to inquire about an accident that no one had told her about as yet? The dark-haired girl is of Italian and Greek background and works as the local representative of a milk company. She's neither brooding nor particularly emotional, seemed to me, and far from hysterical. The uncanny things that happened in her life intrigued her more in an intellectual way than in an emotional, fearful way. When she was 16, she and 5 other girls were playing the popular parlor game of the Ouija board in one of the bedrooms. Jean and Michelle Di Giovanni, one of the girls, were working the board when it started to move as if pushed by some force stronger than themselves. Still very skeptical about Ouija boards, Jean demanded some sign or proof of a spiritual presence. She got a quick reply, 4 loud knocks on the wall. There was nobody in the back of the walls who could have caused them. Suddenly, the room got very cold, and they panicked and called the seance off, and that was then and there. Ever since, she has heard uncanny noises in her parents' house. These have ranged from footsteps to crashing sounds, as if someone or something were thrown against a wall or onto the floor. There never was a rational explanation for these sounds. After Jean moved out to her own place in Burlingame, she returned home for occasional weekends to be with her mother. Her mother sleeps in the dining room area upstairs to save herself the trouble of walking up and down the stairs to the bedroom level, since she does have a heart condition. On the occasions when Jean spent a weekend at home, she would sleep in her mother's former bedroom, situated directly beneath the one her mother now used. One night, as Jean lay awake in bed, she heard footsteps overhead. They walked across the ceiling, as if they had no place to go. Thinking that her mother had breathing difficulties, she raced upstairs, but found her mother fast asleep in bed. Moreover, when questioned about the footsteps the next morning, she assured her daughter she had heard nothing. Were they a man's footsteps or a woman's? I asked Jean Grosso when we discussed this after the investigation was over. A man's, she replied without hesitation. Once in a while, when she is in the dining area upstairs, she will see something out of the corner of an eye. Do you hear that helicopter? It's shaking the walls. Ew. That's creepy. Get away. Alright, so once in a while when she is in the dining area upstairs, she will see something out of the corner of an eye, a flash, something or somebody moving about, and as soon as she concentrates on it, it is not there. She had chalked all that up to her imagination, of course. When I'm coming down the steps in the hall, I get a chill up my spine, the girl said. As if I didn't want to continue on, my mother gets the same feelings there too. I recently discovered this. That was the spot where I later took my psychic photographs. Did these two psychic people, mother and daughter, act like living cameras? Do you ever have a feeling of a presence with you when you are all alone? Yes, in my mother's bedroom. I feel someone is watching me, and I turn, but there's no one there. I question her about the garden and the area around the basement. Jean confessed she did not go there often, since the garden gave her an uneasy feeling. She avoided it whenever she could for no reason she could logically explain. One night, when she spent the weekend at her parents' house and was just falling asleep a little after midnight, she was awakened by the sound of distant voices. The murmur of the voices was clear enough, but when she sat up to listen further, they went away. She went back to sleep, blaming her imagination for the incident, but a week later, to the day, her incipient sleep was again interrupted by the sound of a human voice. This time it was a little girl's or a woman's voice crying out, "Help! Help me!" She jumped up as fast as she could, hear her heartbeat in her ears. Surely her mother had called her. Then she remembered that her mother had gone to Santa Cruz. There was nobody in the house who could have called for help. She looked outside. It was way after midnight, and the surrounding houses were all dark. But the voice she had just heard had not come from the outside. It was there, right in the haunted room with her. I decided to interview Jean's mother, Mrs. Adriana Grosso, the calm, pleasant woman whose skepticism in psychic matters has always been pretty strong. "We've had this house since 1957, she explained, but it was already 5 years old when we had bought it. The previous owners were named Stovall, and they were about to lose it when we bought it. I know nothing about them beyond that." The very first night she went to bed in the house, something tried to prevent her from doing so. Something kept pushing her back up. On the first landing of the stairs leading down to the bedroom level, something kept her from continuing on down. She decided to fight it out. Every time after that first experience, she had the same impression, that she really shouldn't be coming downstairs. "I hear the footsteps upstairs when I'm downstairs, and I hear footsteps downstairs when I'm upstairs, and there never is anyone there causing them," she complained. On several occasions she awoke screaming, which brought her daughter running in anxiously to calm her. She assured her she had had a nightmare, but it was not true. On several different occasions, she felt something grabbing her and trying to crush her bones. Something held her arms pinned down. Finally, she had to sleep with the lights on, and it seemed to help. The sound of a big crash also made the family wonder what was wrong with their house. Mrs. Grosso heard it upstairs, and her son Alan, upstairs at the same time, thought it was downstairs, only to discover that it was neither here nor there. Many times the doorbell would ring and there was no one outside, Mrs. Grosso added, but I always assumed it was the children of the neighborhood playing tricks on us. Loud noises, as if a heavy object had fallen, brought her into the garage to investigate. Nothing had fallen. Nothing was out of place. The garage was locked, and so was the front door. Nobody had gotten in, and yet the noises continued. Only 3 days before our arrival, Mrs. Grosso awoke around 1 a.m. to the sound of someone opening a can in the bathroom. A metal container. In addition, there was thumping. She thought, why is my son working on his movies at this hour of the night? She assumed the can opening noises were those of motion picture film cans, of which her son has many, but he had done nothing of the sort. Soon, even Alan and Mr. Grosso heard the loud crashes, although they were unwilling to concede that it represented anything uncanny. But the family that hears ghosts together also finds solutions together, and the Grossos were not particularly panicky about the whole thing, just curious. It was at this point that I decided to investigate the case, and I so advised Jean Grosso, who greeted us at the door of her parents' house on a very warm day in October 1966. In addition to Sybil and Catherine, my ex-wife, 2 friends, Lori Clerf and Bill Wynn, were with us. We had Lori's car and Bill was doing the driving. We entered the house and I immediately asked Sybil of her psychic impressions. She had not had a chance to orient herself, nor did I allow her to meet the Grossos officially. Whatever she might get now would therefore not be colored by any rational impressions of the people she met or the house she was in. There is something peculiar about the lower portion of the house, Sybil began, referring to the bedroom floor. The house was built in the most peculiar manner. Because the lot sloped toward a ravine, the top floor reached to street level on the front side of the house only. It was here that the house had its living room and entrance hall. On the floor below were the bedrooms and, finally, a garage and adjoining workroom. Underneath was a basement, which, however, led to ground level in the rear, where it touched the bottom of the ravine. At this point, however, Sybil and I did not even know that there was a lower portion to the house, but Jean Grosso assured us there was. We immediately descended the stairs into the section Sybil had felt this invaded by psychic influences. We stopped at the northeast corner of the bedroom floor, where a rear entrance to the house was also situated, leading to a closed-in porch whence one could descend to the ground level outside by wooden stairs. "What do you feel here, Sybil?" I asked, for I noticed she was getting onto something. "Whatever I feel is below this stop," she commented. "It must have come from the old foundations, from the land." Never let it be said that a ghost hunter shies away from dusty basements. Down we went, with Catherine carrying the tape recorder and one of the cameras. In the basement, we could not stand entirely upright, at least I couldn't. "That goes underneath the corridor, doesn't it?" Sybil said, as if she knew. "That's right," Jean Grosso confirmed. "Somebody was chased here," Sybil commented now. 2 men. An accident that should have never happened. Someone died here. A case of mistaken identity? "Can you get more?" I urged her. "There is a lingering feeling of a man," Sybil intoned. "He is the victim. He was not the person concerned. He was running from the water's edge to a higher part of the land. He was a fugitive. Anyone coming from the San Francisco waterfront would be coming up here to higher ground. Whom was he running from? The law. I feel uniforms. There is an element of supposed justice in it, but how long ago was he killed? 1884. His name? Wasserman. That's how I get it. I feel the influence of his last moments here, but not his body. He wants us to know he was Wasserman, but not the Wasserman wanted by the man. What does he look like to you? Ruddy face, peculiarly deep eyes. He's here, but not particularly cooperative. Does he know he is dead? I asked. I don't think he knows that, but he notices me. I asked Sybil to convey the message that we knew he was innocent. 2 names I have to get, Sybil insisted, and started to spell. Otrane. E-O-T-T-R-E-N-E. Wasserman. Wasserman tells me these names. Povey. Povey. He says to find them. These people are the men who killed him. How was he killed? They had to kill him. They thought that he was someone else. What was the other one wanted for? He doesn't know. He was unfortunate to have been here. What is his first name? Jan. Jan. Upon my prodding, Sybil elicited also the information that this John Wasserman was a native of San Francisco, that his father's name was Johann or John, and he lived at 324 Emil Street. Proceeded then to exorcise the ghost in my usual manner, speaking gently of the other side and what awaited him there. Sybil conveyed my wishes to the restless one and reported that he understood his situation now. He's no trouble, Sybil murmured. She's very sympathetic to ghosts. With that, we left the basement and went back up the stairs into the haunted bedroom, where I took some photographs. Then I moved into the living room area, which was upstairs, and took some more. All in all, about a dozen black and white photographs, including some of the garage and the stairs. Imagine my pleased reaction when I discovered a week later, when the film came back from the laboratory, 2 of the photographs had psychic material on them. One taken of the stairs leading from the bedroom floor to the top floor shows a whitish substance like dense fog filling the front right half of my picture. The other remarkable photograph taken of Mrs. Grosso leaning against the wall in the adjoining room shows a similar substance with mirror effect, covering the front third of the area of the picture. There is a reflection of a head and shoulders of a figure that at first glance I took to be Mrs. Grosso's. On close inspection, however, it is quite dissimilar and shows rather a heavy head of hair, whereas Mrs. Grosso's hairdo is close to the head. Mrs. Grosso wears a dark housecoat over a light dress, but the image shows a woman or girl wearing a dark dress or sweater over a white blouse. I asked Jean Grosso to report to me any changes in the house after our visit. On November 21st, 1966, I heard from her again. The footsteps were gone all right, but there was still something strange going on in the house. Could there have been 2 ghosts? Loud crashing noises were heard, as well as the slamming of doors and noises similar to the thumping of ash cans. No sensible explanation for the noises could be observed by either Jean Grosso or her mother since we were there, nor by her brother and his fiancée, nor even the non-believing father. No part of the house seemed to be immune from the disturbance. To test things, Jean Grosso slept at her mother's house soon after we left at 11 p.m. The thumping started. About the same time, Mrs. Grosso was awakened by 3 knocks under her pillow. These were followed almost immediately by the sound of thumping downstairs and movements of a heavy metallic can. Before I could answer Jean, I had another report from her. Things were far from quiet at the house in Millbrae. Her brother's fiancée, Ellen, was washing clothes in the washing machine. She had closed and secured the door to the laundry room so that the noise would not disturb her intended. She was asleep in the bedroom situated next to that room. Suddenly, she distinctly heard someone trying to get into the room by force, and then she felt a presence with her that caused her to run upstairs in panic. About the same time, Jean and her mother had heard a strange noise from the bathroom below, and the floor they were on. Jean went downstairs and found a brush on the tile floor of the bathroom. Nobody had been downstairs at the time. The brush had fallen by itself into the middle of the floor. When a picture in Brother Allen's room lost its customary place on the wall, the thumbtack holding it up disappeared, and the picture itself somehow got to the other side of his bookcase. The frame is pretty heavy, and had the picture just fallen off, it would have landed on the floor behind the bookcase. Instead, it was neatly leaning against the wall on top of it. This unnerved the young man somewhat, as he had not really accepted the possibility of the uncanny up to this point, even though he had witnessed some pretty unusual things himself. Meanwhile, Jean Grosso managed to plow through the microfilms at the San Mateo County Library in Belmont. There was nothing of interest in the newspapers for 1884, but the files were far from complete. However, in another newspaper of the area, the Redwood City Gazette, there was an entry that Jean Grosso thought worth passing on for my opinion. Captain Waterman was mentioned in a brief piece, and the fact that the townspeople were glad that his bill had died, and they could be well rid of it. The possibility that Sybil heard Wasserman when the name was actually Waterman was not to be dismissed. At least not until a Jan Wasserman could be identified from the records somewhere. Since the year 1884 had been mentioned by the ghosts, I looked up that year in H. Bancroft's History of California, an imposing record of that state's history published in 1890 in San Francisco. In Volume 7, on pages 434 and 435, I learned that there had been great irregularities during the election of 1884, and political conditions bordered on anarchy. The man who had been first lieutenant governor and later governor of the state was named R.W. Waterman. This, of course, may only be conjecture and not correct. Perhaps she really did mean Wasserman with 2 S's. But my search in the San Francisco directory, Langley's, for 1882 and 1884 did not yield any Jan Wasserman. The 1881 Langley did, however, list an Ernest Wasserman, a partner in Wasserman Brothers. He was located at 24th Street and Potrero Avenue. Sybil reported that Wasserman had been killed by a certain Potrain and certain Povey. Potrain, as a name, does not appear anywhere. Could she have meant Potrero? The name Povey, equally unusual, does, however, appear in the 1902 Langley on page 1416. Francis J. Povey was a foreman at Cast & Company and lived at 1 Beedman Street. It seems rather amazing that Sybil Leek would come up with such an unusual name as Povey, even if this is not the right Povey in our case. Wasserman claimed to have lived on Emil Street. There was no such street in San Francisco. There was, however, an Emma Street listed by Langley in 1884. The city directories available to me are in shambles, and plowing through them is a costly and difficult task. There are other works that might yield clues to the identity of our man. It is perhaps unfortunate that my setup does not allow for capable research assistants to help with so monumental a task, and that the occasional exact corroboration of ghostly statements is due more to good luck than to complete coverage of all cases brought to me. Fortunately, the liberated ghosts do not really care. They know the truth already. But I was destined to hear further from the Grosso residents. On January 24th, 1967, all was well, except for one thing, and that really happened back on Christmas Eve. Jean's sister-in-law, Ellen, was sleeping on the couch upstairs in the living room. It was around 2 in the morning, and she could not drop off to sleep because she had had too much coffee. While she was lying there wide awake, she suddenly noticed the tall, muscular figure of a man, somewhat shadowy, coming over from the top of the stairs to the Christmas tree, as if to inspect the gifts placed near it. At first, she thought it was Jean's brother, but as she focused on the figure, she began to realize it was nobody of flesh and blood. She noticed his face now, and that it was bearded, and it dawned on her what she was seeing, and she began to react. The stranger just vanished from the spot where he had been standing a moment before. Had he come to say goodbye, and had the Christmas tree evoked a long-ago Christmas holiday of his own? Before Ellen could tell Jean Grosso about her uncanny experience, Jean herself asked if she had heard the footsteps that kept her awake, overheard that night. They compared the time, and it appeared that the footsteps and the apparition occurred in about the same time period. For a few days all was quiet, as if the ghosts were thinking it over. Then the pacing resumed, more furiously now, perhaps because something within him had been aroused, and he was beginning to understand his position. At this point, everybody in the family heard the attention-getting noises. Mrs. Grosso decided to address the intruder and to tell him that I would correct the record of his death, that I would tell the world that he was not, after all, a bad fellow, but a case of mistaken identity. It must have pleased the unseen visitor, for things began to quiet down again, and as of February 6th, at least the house had settled down to an ordinary suburban existence on the outskirts of bustling San Francisco. But the Grossos still were not completely at ease, since there was always a chance that the ghost will decide I am not telling the world fast enough, though that would seem patently unreasonable. After all, he had to wait an awfully long time before we took notice of him, and I've jumped several ghosts to get him into print as an emergency case. So be it. Mr. Wasserman of Millbrae is not the Mr. Wasserman they were looking for, whoever they were. They just had themselves a wild ghost chase for nothing. A few last words. Anyone who thinks ghosts are what rattles around medieval castles in England surely will know better after reading these accounts of American hauntings. Tragedy of a human being turning into what we have come to call a ghost is universal and extends across all time and location. Perhaps I have shown that what we are dealing with is the essential part of a personality that survives the physical death of the outer body. We should neither be frightened nor disrespectful of those who are trapped by their emotional turmoils beyond death, since it can happen to just about anyone. Well, that's the end of that one. So on that note, hey Jason, we're going to move on to our next book, Death. And this one pretty intriguing. Let me put the innards back in here. I'm wondering how the Facebook thing is going. I did get my new internet box, but The internet seems to be going up and down, and I did ask my teenage daughter not to share the internet password with anyone, but come to find out, she has, so... I may just have to change the password and keep it to myself and just share it where it's needed. So this book is known as Death. Let me see if this is showing up well over here. Yes, can you see it well? And this is by Mr. Robert Wilkins. As you know with books, there's a foreword, but I'm going to read the inside cover. Death, a history of man's obsessions and fears. We're fascinated with death. Some of us deny it. Some try to escape it. Most dread it. Filled with strange anecdotes and illustrated with many bizarre and ghoulish images, Death, a history of man's obsessions and fears, records the links to which people throughout history have gone to cope with the 5 principal fears regarding death. The fear of being buried alive, of our body being defiled in the grave, of disintegrating, of being forgotten, and of suffering an ignominious death. Here you can read about it. The case of Lavrinia Merle, who died of hysterics. 2 days after her burial, she was discovered turned over in her coffin, having given birth to a 7-month-old baby. Holy shnikes. The various methods of embalming, including the Egyptian and a step-by-step account of modern embalming. The horrifying, slow, and painful ending of Robert Francois Damiens, who was tortured to death after attempting to assassinate King Louis IX, I believe? Could be the 10th? I'm so bad at Roman numerals. Author Robert Wilkins completes this unique volume with an expose of the wiles of contemporary funeral directors who use psychological manipulation on the bereaved in order to extract more money from them. This leads to unimaginative, uniform funerals that we accept meekly and without thought or complaint. The author's final words are a plea for greater individuality and eccentricity to be applied to man's ultimate rite of passage. So the cover art is by Girardon, /art resource, New York, anonymous, 16th century. German school emblems of death, Muse de Beaux-Arts, Little France. Jacket design, Curtis Toe. Good job, Curtis Toe. I wasn't going to read the foreword, but yeah, it's got some pretty good art in there. Like this one. Yeah, can you read what that says? I can't. I have no idea what that says. What that says? I don't know. I have no idea. What in tarnation is that? It's got a good directory here. There's acknowledgements. I'm not going to read that. It's just full of names. Let's do the Apologia. In centuries before our own, life was short and early death common. A Victorian mother might have to give birth to 6 children in order that 3 might survive into adolescence. Death, intimate, cruel, and obscene, plucked the young and innocent from the very midst of their families. Today we live longer and death has become more remote, sanitized, and mysterious. With mysteries come ignorance and recoil. Few adults below 40 have ever seen a corpse. When death finally overtakes us, it is usually in the clinical anonymity of a hospital bed, distanced from our families and tended by strangers. thus protected, the still living keep their death-related anxieties to themselves. To psychiatrists like myself, fears and phobias are the stuff of life, and anxieties concerning death are omnipresent. The only reason that we are able to lead productive lives is because most of us, for most of the time, ward off such anxieties by marshaling our defense mechanisms. Psychodynamic forces such as denial and repression push down the disturbing reality of our own mortality into the eddying nether regions of our subconscious minds. If we thought too much about death, we would rush to embrace it, but our defenses are never completely effective, and are sometimes, albeit temporarily, breached. It is at times such as these that thoughts of death filter upwards into the conscious mind. Death-related anxieties can be broadly divided into the spiritual and temporal. This book eschews religion's considerations of afterlife, judgment, and retribution. It deals, for the most part, with much more secular anxieties, those in which curiosity can be satisfied by direct observation rather than philosophical contemplation. Research among old people has revealed common sources of anxiety, each of which will be dealt with in a separate section of this book. It would be a mistake to think of the fear of premature burial as one of historical interest only, since it has its origins in the uncertainty of the diagnosis of death. Many old people, given permission to voice their inner anxieties, often refer somewhat jocularly to the hope that they will be truly dead when laid in their coffin. The precise timing of the moment of death has taken on profound medico-legal significance in matters concerned with resuscitation and organ transplantation. Posthumous indignity is a fear that has remained widespread long after the passing of body snatchers. We still endow a lifeless corpse with the capacity for feeling hurt and the expectation of respect. All forms of defilement of the dead, especially the thefts or mutilation of corpses, are regarded by the majority as deeply distasteful. Religion concerns itself with the fate of the soul and pays scant attention to the demise of the carcass. Generally speaking, thoughts about bodily disintegration become manifest only when corpses are discovered in which the normal disintegrative post-mortem processes have been arrested or attenuated. Spectacular examples include the naturally and artificially preserved mummies on display in the museums of the world. Modern interest in the preservation of bodies embraces temporary and purely cosmetic effects of American embalming, and the cryonic movement, whose members seek to freeze the newly dead in the hope of the resurrection made possible by future medical technology. Fear of being forgotten after death is one of man's most deep-rooted anxieties. It is uncomfortable to think that we will not be alive 100 years from now. It is even more disturbing to think that hardly anyone then alive will remember that we existed at all. It is no coincidence that the presidents and prime ministers in their second terms become preoccupied with their place in history. The rest of us, who can never hope to be included in national biographies, can nevertheless have recourse to a variety of stratagems, especially ostentatious and eccentric modes of death and disposal, in order to facilitate heightened remembrance by future generations. Although most of us have an idea of what constitutes a good death, ignominious death is often capricious and quite beyond our control. A truth arrested too by the large number of royals who have met with ignominial ends. So often ignominy alludes to painful or lonely deaths. and it is a small wonder that some preempt an ignominious death with a dignified suicide. There is a widespread superstition that mere talk of death will hasten our inevitable end, while taciturnity will magically postpone our demise. Such a reluctance to contemplate forward planning has resulted in the unimaginative, look-alike funerals, which we accept meekly and without complaint. The afterword is a plea for greater individuality and eccentricity to be applied to man's ultimate rite of passage. We are all simultaneously attracted to and repulsed by death. In gathering the material for this book, I have attempted to lessen my own anxiety by turning an obsession into a hobby. It has been therapeutic and, as such, needs no apologia. On that note, boys and girls, we are going to go to our first music break. So let me see here. On this music break, we have Mr. Roy Washington, who is our musical host. He has given us most of our music that we do play here on the show. And he is doing his own show called Quest Nation, and has his own Roy Washington, just being his own artist. And then he is also a member of Prime Example. He will be singing Subliminal. Then we have Chico with Last Forever and Juice. Then we have Griff from Toronto, Canada with Zoo. You guys, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
Yeah. Come on.
I see you, Roy Washington, man. What's happening, man?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. They never say it in words, but in deeds wars declare. Justice is gone and the sight's none to spare. Especially the kingdom encased in melanin. But these suckers are weak, kings and queens will ride again. Come on. Slackers with badges, the white sheets and the maggots. Watch them fall as I tag them because I'm better than average. A sharpshooter with words with my eye to the scope. And they escape when I've donned the black cape? Is hell no. I'm a ninja for right, who can vanish from sight. Pick you off in the night, but still the Lord is my light. Perceiving all you see, the truth behind the scenes. Instead of jumping bandwagons, the light says believe in me. Cause you're a puppet, no doubt. 45th turned you out. Though I saw your lips moving, no sound came out. So I was sent from the heavenlies, born so you could find me. Swam the scene and stream, took flight during the 90s. Landed in grace, wrote a verse of hip-hop. Got with Jay and found the taste was smooth as butterscotch. We had hood love and money. Problems, they be on me, but we stayed in the flow. It had juice like Manolo.
They can try to oppress, you can try to impress. It's after success, none less. You can look in my eyes, you can feel in my vibes. King down inside and it's so subliminal. God on my side, I ain't worried about none. If it ain't about money, then it ain't about none. Laughing at my enemies, I know they see me coming. If it ain't subliminal, they can't even see me. Politics abolish it. I'm here to raise the consciousness for every face and race up in this nation trapped in poverty. Diamond in the rough, need to cut, shape it and polish it. Bad thoughts cripple life, we can be an optimist. We can be an optimist, reconstruct apocalypse. Broke people always hating, mix me with that gossiping. Rose up in the concrete, rain and sun, I'm blossoming. My people need to be like kind of Velcro, then we conquer it. They can try to oppress, you can try to impress. I'm just after success, none less. You can look in my eyes, you can feel in my vibes. King down inside and it's so subliminal. God on my side, I ain't worried about none. If it ain't about money, then it ain't about none. Laughing at my enemies, I know they see me coming. If it ain't subliminal, they can't even see me coming.
The 45th is a joke, and he's weak in disgust. He plans to divide, but there's no stopping us. If we have to fight, go toe to toe for our lives, we prevail and got sight, cause only light I recite. I blow my lyrics like a shotgun, camouflaged inside the tracks. Now watch the suckers run. I'm moving fast enough, heads up, now here I come. I designed 50 ways to make this murder fun. I spit the lyrical rain that coat the concrete, that give life and take form. Arise and walk the street. Am I the greatest to spit? Feel the spray and we'll see. Let it dry, all the lies and the truth will point to me. Even when surrounded by a million MCs. I'm the one under the sun who's the greatest of these. I got the Holy Ghost juking and tapping while I'm rapping. Sticking and moving like Roy Jones, I'll make it happen. Even animals move when the novelist is rocking. My doggy started barking, his ears just a-flopping. Subliminally, I penetrate camps like an enemy. Flicking the lights, cancel sight, cause you're not seeing me.
You can try to oppress, you can try to impress. I'm just after success, none less, none less. You can look in my eyes, you can feel it, my vibes. Live a king down inside and it's so subliminal. I got God on my side, I ain't worried about none. If it ain't about money, then it ain't about none. Laughing at my enemies, I know they see me coming. If it ain't subliminal, they can't even see me coming. Last forever. The rain never, rain never, rain never, rain never, rain never. The last forever. The rain never lasts 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 forever. I know it's dangerous. You're tired of the games. You're tired from all the hurt. You're tired from all the pain. Put your trust in all these lames, but that wasn't your aim. Hide they true colors, down the line them change. They words don't meet they actions. Loyalty what they lacking. Tell them to stop the slacking. Mama, you know nobody's practice. The rain never lasts forever. 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 I swear to God, I know these ruthless. What type of king will make they queen look stupid? Childish games when I'm grown. You want somebody you can call your own. Indifferent than your phone. When you asking me, act like you wrong. Your heart say stay when your patience gone. When y'all together, you still feel alone. Yeah, the rain never lasts forever. 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 Lasts forever. The rain never, rain never, rain never, the lasts forever.
More than a man, but you can't read. More than a man, but you can't read. More than a man, but you can't leave.
You can't leave.
You're right where you wanna be. Time is right here with me. You're right where you wanna be.
Right with me.
You can be anything you want. If that's what you really want. You can be anything you want. All I want you to do right now is leave here soon.
All I wanna do.
All I want place. Go back to my place where I know it's safe. And lock myself in my room. Won't watch the news, cause it is so confused. What can I do if I lose you? All I want to do right now is leave this.
All I wanna do.
All I want to do right now is leave this for good.
Okay. She was a loompa, now her body super duper. Getting a lot of attention she was never used to. Hitting me up like I was Uber. Got a few miles, so I guess she's a cougar. Real winner, never seen her with a loser. Gorilla talk, ooga booga booga. Scuba, tuba, diver, I'm a rider. Getting cider, sweet like cider. Fighter, rider, neither wants to get it going. Know it, hold it, fold it, blow it. Wait, I'm joking. Cages broken from these beasts from down east on the streets. It's a zoo.
All I want to do right now is leave this.
All I wanna do.
All I want to do right now is leave this for good.
Juice. Get a vibe. Big dreams, big money, back dreams, big money, back dreams, big money, back dreams. Ate up. I think I got juice. I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you feel, girl? I think I'm the I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you feel, girl?
Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip.
Juice. Handmade, get bucks for me. Drop the soda can, she got a crush on me. Little mama so in love with me. Even Todd look up to me.
Little, but it never mattered. Got these haters pissed. I control their bladder, come across you. It's a chance to scatter. Henny on the house like a fucking ladder. See your main. Yes, I had to back her. She was being extra up and coming active. Beat it out the frame and let the glass shatter. Beat it out the frame and leave a flabbergasted.
I think I got juice. I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you feel, girl? I think I'm the I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you feel, girl?
Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Fly guy catch flight, well connected high five. Johnny Gill my mind. Bad chicks my type. Pull up like Huggies they mug. Pull up like Huggies they love me. Pull up like Huggies cause I'm the MC Hammer can't touch. Off that vivid hen like I slice a chicken. I was practicing. I'm a mathematician. Call me Michael Bibbins. I'm a new addition, not a Buddhist. Don't wear true religion. Yeah, I spit a lot like my tooth is missing. And she gave me now her roof is missing. I'm the bomb, baby. Now the proof is ticking. Be calm, baby. We in a new dimension.
I think I got juice. I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you feel, girl? I think I'm the I think I'm that hitter.
say I'm the man. I say, how do you feel? Turn up. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Juice.
Misguided and misunderstood till one day he cried out, Lord, save me. Teach me the lessons of life, won't you raise me? Because I tried everything under my hat and I found all my plans were tears in the right. I need a hero, a real life camaraderie to step in to see me and deliver a power play. Something to raise my head from the dust is the must. I find someone in whom I can trust. I must grow in knowledge, live what I learn. I'm so glad to meet you, yo, my name is Vern. Lead me any way that you're willing and I'll share. I need your power play. Yeah. Here comes another one. So good to be clothed in your right mind. Dreams to the front and all past behind. Memories of things you did so absurd. Came to the curb, now burns the word. Cause often we're low now, problems can grind us. But with power from God, yeah, we all stand victorious. Listen to the seed, the knowledge and digest the real on me. Cause a trooper like Jay keeps it righteous. And express a prime example of a vocalist, adjust your bubble. Leroy is like dangerous trouble. Trouble if you want it, peace if you with it. Never before known of a man who can stand it, but so irrelevant. So kick it in if you will, Lord. And I shall. I need your power play. Yeah. Here comes another one. For the knowledge, and now you're not guessing. When power meets the darkness, the devil's got you go. That's my Weasel, and now he's going loco. If you got a problem, God can solve it. Power from the churro, and you're in his outfit. Why must the fit stay dirty so filthy? Get off your rear and whitewash the pickings. Power for cleansing, power for sanitizing, power for us, power for the rising of the sun. Cause in your darkest hour, you can look up and express to feel the power up. I need your power play. Yeah. Comes another one.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Let me know if that music is too loud while I'm talking. But otherwise, I think we're good at 60. But yeah, leave me any comments in the chat room and let me know how that sounds. How does that sound to you? Does that sound good? Let me know. Because you guys are on the outside looking in, and here I am over here trying to do my thing and multitask. I'm pretty good at multitasking, but at the same time, not quite. Let me go over here to this. Turn it down a smidge. There we go. There's so much stuff going on over here these days. But it's good because we're out and about in so many places. I'm so excited. I'm so glad you can join us. We've been doing a story time with me, TessaTNT. We were supposed to have Miss Mama Mary on, but she's out doing a family outing, and I hope they're having an awesome time. The microphone is resting on the camera. Let me see if I can fix this really quick. I was trying to figure out the sound and get all that going, but I think I got it fixed. I keep thinking that, and then something else happens. I'm wearing my horror, says scary movies and chill. That's what I like. Scary movies and chill, y'all. Did you guys know they're coming out with a new Scream movie? We're all super excited about that. Let me go over here real quick. Trying to, I don't know, I think I'm going to have to change the password on my internet because people don't respect what I say. Between 7 and 10, you cannot use the internet. So, having Floyd closed down till in. Oops. You should see it. Alright. So we're going to continue on with story time with me, TessaTNT, and Death. This is a good book. This is yet another book that I received from my dear grandpapa, my grandpa Cookie. And he's got quite a good collection. I've been enjoying it so far. So this one, chapter 1, let me move this over a smidge, smidgy, there we go. Is that better? Make sure I'm unmuted over here. Gotta cover all my bases. Here we go. And this one is known as the fear of premature burial. 1. Buried alive. The unendurable oppression of the lungs, the stifling fumes of the damp earth, the clinging to the death garments, the rigid embrace of the narrow house, the blackness of the obsolete night, the silence like the sea that overwhelms, the unseen but palpable presence of the conqueror worm. Such were the terrifying images evoked by Edgar Allan Poe in The Premature Burial. Poe believed that burial alive was a subject too entirely horrible for the purposes of legitimate fiction, and added, "We know of nothing so agonizing upon earth. We can dream of nothing half so hideous in the realms of the nethermost hell." The narrator in Poe's story had more reason than most to be scared, suffering as he did from catalepsy, a neurological condition which produces intermittent episodes of profound bodily paralysis, closely mimicking death itself. Many believed, erroneously, that Poe was also prone to cataleptic attacks and that the Master of Terror himself lived his life with the ever-present dread of being placed in his family vault while still alive. The fear of being buried alive is one of man's oldest, more profound even than the fear of death itself. To be taken into the blackness when life is extinct is a dreadful enough prospect. For the grim reaper to come calling before the appointed hour is to condemn the yet living to a seeming entity of suffocative horror. Although the obsession with premature burial reached its height in the 19th century Europe, its history stretches back to ancient times, Plinty the Elder, AD 23-279. Quotes instances of those deemed dead who had subsequently revived, if only briefly. One account told to Consul Achilles, who was solemnly placed in his funeral pyre. When the faggots were lit, his shrieks of pain altered relatives to their terrible mistake. But before the flames could be doused, Achilles was dead. Pedantically speaking, Achilles' case was one of premature disposal rather than premature burial. But the fallibility of the diagnosis of death is the common factor in death. It is often impossible to obtain independent and corroborative evidence in examples cited, and the truth is further obscured by Pliny's uncritical acceptance of hearsay and his reluctance to check the accuracy of his sources. A failing that became apparent as the hallmark of later writers about premature burial. An early instance of premature burial is Johannes Duns Scotus, grammarian and psychophysician who died in Colonia around 1308 and whose body was placed in a vault. Sometime later, when the vault was reopened, he was found outside the coffin, having torn his hands in a futile attempt to prise open the doors of his subterranean prison. It is claimed that Thomas A. Kempis, 1379 to 1471, was denied canonization after it was pointed out that, when the coffin was opened, splinters of wood from underside of the lid were found embedded beneath the fingernails. That's not good. Surely, no aspiring saint, finding himself alive in his grave, would have made such frantic attempts to postpone the meeting with his Maker. A 20th century example occurs in Ronald Blythe's A Kinfield. William Russ, the village gravedigger, tells how, in the 1910s, people did not hurry to bury the dead, in case they were still alive. Russ believed that a rare lot of folk got buried alive, and makes particular mention of old Macaw Hibble of Framlingham, who was laid out for dead no fewer than 3 times. On the last occasion on which he drew back from the jaws of death, Hibble reckoned he saw heaven and hell, but he wouldn't say what he saw in hell. He thought it would be too much for Framlingham. The anxiety concerning premature burial lies dormant in the subconscious of all of us, occasionally surfacing as a profound but mercifully brief paroxysm of anxiety. Nowadays, it is a private terror rarely shared with others, in stark contrast to the openly expressed national hysteria of earlier centuries, which reached its zenith in 19th century France. The renaissance of the preoccupation with premature burial can be accurately dated to 1742, the year in which Jacques Benin Winslow, a distinguished French physician, published The Uncertainty of the Signs of Death. The author was well qualified to write his book, since he claimed to have been placed alive in his coffin on 2 separate occasions. Can you believe that, folks? That is crazy. Winslow's thesis was simple. A body can be called a corpse only when it shows unmistakable signs of putrefaction. The particular implication of the thesis was equally straightforward. To prevent the possibility of being buried alive, it behooved relatives to keep the body above ground until the stench of decomposing flesh forced them to the conclusion that the last flicker of life had finally been extinguished. To persuade the population of the need for such an unaesthetic practice, Winslow marshaled a large number of examples in which unseemly haste had resulted in dispatch of the dearly departed before they were truly departed. One of Winslow's more celebrated examples concerned two young Parisian lovers. The girl's father refused permission for them to marry and insisted that she wed another, much richer man. Profound post-nuptial depression developed, and the bride quickly sank into a coma so deep that she was pronounced dead. Her lover, for a reason not satisfactorily explained, suspected that she might be alive and set about digging her out of the ground. His suspicions were well founded, and he was able to retrieve and revive her. The couple fled to England, where they lived contentedly for 10 years until homesickness tempted them back to France. On a return visit to Paris, the woman was unlucky enough to bump into her legal husband, who not only recognized his dead wife, but immediately instituted court proceedings to have her returned to him. Although the court found in favor of the widower, his hopes for a resumed married life were thwarted by the lovers fleeing to England for a second and presumably final time. As is so often the case, Winslow gives too little in the way of corroborative information, names, dates, places, to allow one to come to any valid conclusions about the truth or falsehood of his accounts of premature burial. Variations on a theme. Writing nearly a century later, Edgar Allan Poe cites a true instance of premature burial which has an uncannily familiar ring about it. In the year 1810, a case of living inhumation happened in France. The heroine of the story was Mademoiselle Victorine Lafourcade, a young girl of illustrious family, of wealth, and of great personal beauty. Among her numerous suitors was Julien Bossat, a poor literature or journalist of Paris. His talents and general amiability had recommended him to the heiress, by whom he seems to have been truly beloved. But her pride of birth decided her, finally, to reject him, and to wed Monsieur Renel, a banker and diplomatist of some eminence. After marriage, however, this gentleman neglected and perhaps even more positively ill-treated her. Having passed with him some wretched years, she died. At least, her condition so closely resembled death as to deceive everyone who saw her. She was buried, not in a vault, but in an ordinary grave in the village of her nativity. Filled with despair and still inflamed by the memory of a profound attachment, the lover journeys from the capital to the remote province of which the village lies, with the romantic purpose of disinterring the corpse and possessing himself of its luxuriant tresses. At midnight, he unearths the coffin, opens it, and is in the act of detaching the hair when he is arrested by the unclosing of the beloved's eyes. In fact, the lady has been buried alive. Vitality had not altogether departed, and she was aroused by the caresses of her lover from the lethargy which had been mistaken for death. He bore her frantically to his longings. In time, she revived. Here's a little picture. Her woman's heart was adamant, and this last lesson of love sufficed to soften it. She bestowed it upon Bossat. She returned no more to her husband, but concealing from her resurrection to him, fled with her lover to America. 20 years afterwards, the two returned to France in the persuasion that time so greatly altered the lady's appearance that her friends would be unable to recognize her. They were mistaken, however, for the first meeting Monsieur Renel did actually recognize and cling to his wife. This claim she resisted, and a judicial tribunal sustained her in her resistance, deciding that the peculiar circumstances with a long lapse of years had extinguished not only equitably but legally the author of the husband. Montague Summers wrote his scholarly book The Vampire, His Kith and Kin in 1928, close on 80 years after Poe's death, in order to draw parallels between vampire legends and less supernaturally reviving corpses. Summers quote an example of premature burial. The date was about 1760. The country, France. Gabrielle Delaunay, the 18-year-old daughter of the president of the Civil Tribunal of Toulouse, was betrothed to Captain Maurice Desserres. They were married shortly before Desserres was posted abroad. He left his bride in France at his father-in-law's instance. 2 years later, news was received of Desserres' death. Subsequently, Gabrielle remarried. In fact, he had not died and returned to Paris 5 years later. On passing the Church of Rock, he noticed a funeral in progress and idly asked the name of the deceased. He was informed that the dead woman was Madame de Bourg, formerly Mademoiselle Gabrielle Delaunay. The rest of the story has a certain unpredictability about it. Desserres, in a welter of grief, bribes a sexton to exhume Gabrielle, finding her still living. The captain then seizes the body and makes off, threading a swift course through the tombstone. It is 5 years later that the inevitable meeting occurs between the revitalized corpse and her former spouse. Gabrielle fled, but was seen escaping in a carriage which bore the coat of arms of the noble house of Desserres. The legal moves instigated by de Bourg to claim back his wife caused the profoundest sensation. Gabrielle initially claimed to be a South American orphan. The charade was finally exposed by the sudden introduction of her daughter, who positively identified her mother. Court found in favor of de Bourg, but his victory was short-lived, literally. Crying, "I restore you to what you have lost," she fell a corpse at his feet. Simultaneously, Desserres committed suicide. Both deaths would appear to have been irreversible. Readers may see many similarities between the vicissitudes of Gabrielle and Desserres and the true story of Elena and Gerardo by the Italian Matteo Badello, 1485 to 1561. Although such variations on common theme would tend to devalue the truth of any of these accounts, it would be wrong to discount the notion of premature burial altogether. Dr. Braudel, the much respected French professor of medical jurisprudence in Paris, was contemptuous of the vast majority of examples of supposed premature burial. In his definitive treatise on forensic medicine, death, and sudden death, published in 1902, he contended that the likelihood of a person being buried alive was infinitely remote, provided always that a thorough examination had been carried out by a qualified doctor. He would quarrel with Braudels' caveats, and those who were convinced of the veracity of premature burial were quick to point out that virtually none of the victims had ever seen, let alone been examined by a doctor. In his book, Braudel concedes the possibility of misdiagnosis of death, and hints of premature burial, attesting to its having occurred on 2 occasions. Both accounts were vouched for by medical men. The first concerns Mademoiselle Jeannetre. In 1867, while cholera was raging in the department of Morbihan, a young woman aged 24 was suddenly seized with pain in the head and various other symptoms, and her condition rapidly became serious. The people around her believed that she had got cholera, and before many hours had elapsed, she died. She was laid out and placed in a coffin, and 16 hours after death her burial took place. A noise was heard inside the coffin, which attracted attention. Dr. Roger was summoned. He had the coffin opened and found that life remained. He had the woman removed into the church. He was unsparing in his attentions, but she died in the course of the night and was buried in earnest the following day. This observation, says M. Tordes, relating the facts of Broradel, seemed to us well authenticated as a case of burial of a living person. To make quite sure, we communicated with Dr. Roger, the witness of the incident, and received from him the following reply, dated July 30th, 1847. Actually, that's 1874. Sorry. Yes, I was present at the exhumation of a woman buried in a state of apparent death. I am positive that the woman was still alive when I examined her. It is not a mere probability. Here is a verbatim copy of the notes taken the same evening. Launay, October 1st, 1867, midnight. I exhumed at 8 p.m. Bromère Jeannetre, age 24, buried at 5 p.m. in a grave 6 feet in depth. Several persons heard her tap distinctly against the lid of the coffin. There was no smell, no evacuation of the bowels, and there was abundant evidence of respiration. Distinct rhythmical sound in the region of the heart, no rigor mortis. She was not dead, but like a candle, the flame of which has been extinguished, though the wick continues to glow. No definite sounds of the heart. The eyelids moved in my presence. I kept her unburied until the following day. Bardes continued, it is out of these notes that the account has been compiled. It is an authentic case of burial during life. Without doubt, the danger of being buried alive is not chimerical. Rather churlishly, Dr. Broardel comments, without being as confident as Mr. Dordes, it cannot be denied that the fact of premature burial is within the range of possibility. The other example quoted by Broardel was a hanged criminal in Boston in 1858, diagnosed as dead by 3 doctors, who was subsequently deemed to be alive and who latter died a second and irrevocable time. The account serves to demonstrate that 3 doctors can be as wrong as 1. Pretty true. Doctors Clark Ellis and Shaw attended the hanging of a 28-year-old man at 10 a.m. The unfortunate man dropped 7 or 8 feet. 7 minutes afterward, the heart was heard to beat at a rate of 100 per minute. 2 minutes later, it was 98, and 3 minutes later, still it had diminished to only 60 beats per minute. In a further 2 minutes, the heart sounds disappeared. The heart had stopped beating, and the man was considered to be dead. He was taken down for burial at 10:25 a.m. The heart was stopped, the face was purple, and the pupils of the eyes were dilated. Generally considered a sign of death, at 10:40 a.m. the rope was loosened, as well as the pinions which bound the arms to the sides. Not a pinion, pinions. At 11:30 a.m., 1.5 hours after the hanging, pulse was detected, distinctly and regularly at 80 beats per minute. The chest was then opened. The heart was observed directly and seen to be contracting with force and regularity. By midday, the exposed heart was beating at 40 per minute. Contractions finally ceased at 3:18 p.m., 5 hours after the hanging. Bradell, besides conceding his first case of death misdiagnosed by physicians, adds wryly, "I must point out, in passing, the strange, cool manner in which these Boston physicians performed their experiments on a living man." Indeed. Anne Green fared better. She was hanged at Oxford in 1650. As the corpse was placed in its coffin, someone noticed that she was still breathing. Consequently, a lusty fellow stamped with all his force on her breast and stomach to put her out of her pain. Oh my God. Yes, you should stomp on her, to keep her from hurting. Fuck. Far from killing her, the blows were sufficient to revive her, and she was reputed to have lived for many more years and borne several children. I guess that worked out, but I'm sure it was painful. A gentler method of resuscitation of a criminal was practiced by Sir William Petty on a poor wretch, hanged for a felony and destined for the anatomist's table. According to John Evelyn, the 17th century diarist, Petty's successful prescription was to put the corpse to lie with a warm woman. Ew. That's gross. Get the crack? Medical orthodoxy. The medical profession has usually regarded claims of premature burial with deep suspicion. Most physicians, while conceding the possibility, were quick to point out its rarity. Those few doctors who believed that premature burial was a common occurrence could expect to be condemned and ridiculed by their colleagues. One doctor held up to universal derision by his peers was Franz Hartmann, for his premature burial published in 1895. The review in the British Medical Journal was gravely scathing. What is to be the thought of credibility of an author who gravely narrates a case of an Englishman who died of typhoid fever in 1831, who was buried 4 days later, and after another 4 days of burial, he had been conscious all the time, and that his lungs had been paralyzed and used no air, and that his heart did not beat? The reviewer had no doubt that he thought. A worse farrago of nonsense than that contained in his pamphlet it has seldom been our lot to come across. Whilst the British Medical Journal might pour scorn on alarmists who wrote about the epidemic prevalence of burial alive, The Lancet, an equally prestigious medical publication, regularly featured reports. Here is a chilling example from 1858. A case of restoration of consciousness after burial is recorded by the Austrian journals in the person of a rich manufacturer named Opelt at Ruddenburg, who was buried 15 years ago, and lately, on opening the vault, the lid of the coffin was found forced open, and his skeleton was in a sitting posture in the corner of the vault. If pressed, most 18th century doctors would reluctantly have conceded that cases of people buried alive might have occurred during epidemics of plague, cholera, or smallpox, when for the sake of the living infectious dead or nearly dead had to be speedily interred. Case quoted by Teb, I wanted to say Ted, being, somewhat dyslexic, but it says Teb and Volum in Premature Burial and How It May Be Prevented, 1950, graphically illustrates the dangers. solicitor living in Gloucester recently informed the editor that when first in practice, he had his caretaker of his offices, an old woman who, with her husband, had been in charge of the cholera wards erected just outside the city at the time of the severe pandemic of 1849, when, in Gloucester alone, there were 119 fatal cases. She told him that as soon as the patients were dead, they put them in shells and screwed them down, so as to get them out of the way as quickly as possible. As the small sheds were so crowded, sometimes, she callously remarked, they come to afterwards, and we did hear them kicking in their coffins, but we never unscrewed them, 'cause we knew they'd got to die. That is so sick. Ew. The fate of cholera victims bundled prematurely into their coffins is evoked in all its grim horror in Anton Wiert's painting, L'Inhumation Précipitée. One of the most serious problems experienced by men such as Hartmann, Tebb, and Vollum was the lack of a famous case of premature burial. There may indeed have been many anonymous cholera victims buried alive in Gloucester. But where were the kings, statesmen, or other notables who were testified as dead and who later lived again? Discounting Lazarus as a case of miraculous intervention 4 days post-mortem, the choice of premature interment of the famous usually falls upon the 5th century Emperor Zenon, who, on regaining consciousness in his tomb, is said to have eaten his shoes and the flesh of his arm, and cried out for 2 nights, "Have mercy on me!" It might be thought a trifle odd that some of the former emperor's subjects should hear his pleas and do nothing. Perhaps the explanation was something to do with the fact that an inebriated Zenon was deliberately placed in his sepulchre by his wife. Truly, Zenon was buried alive, but by design, not accident. Yeah, that's not cool. Don't do that, Yeah. Could you just kill him first, then put him in the tomb? Like, he ate his shoes, then his arm? That's pretty gross. Resuscitated prelates. If an emperor, what about a priest? That Cardinal Archbishop Donnet, speaking in a debate in the French Senate in 1866, recounts an example of premature burial. In 1826, on a close summer day, in a church which was exceedingly crowded, a young priest who was in the act of preaching was suddenly seized with giddiness in the pulpit. The words he was uttering became indistinct. He soon lost the power of speech and sank down on the floor. He was taken out of the church and carried home. All was thought to be over. Some hours after, the funeral bell was tolled, and the usual preparations made for the interment. His eyesight was gone, but if he could see nothing, he could hear. And I need not say that what reached his ears was not calculated to reassure him. The doctor came, examined him, and pronounced him dead. The body was measured for the coffin. Night came, and you will easily feel how inexpressible was the anguish of the human being in such a situation. At last, amid the voices murmuring around him, he distinguished that of one whom he had known from infancy. That voice produced a marvelous effect and superhuman effort. Of what followed, I need say no more than that the seemingly dead man stood next day in the same pulpit. Here's a picture. Yeah. Fucking creepy, dude. I don't like it. Oh, I need to get a drink. Okay. Apart from the fact that hysterical paralysis would appear not to be a solely female affliction, and that Frenchmen with historic personality disorders can be called to the priesthood, is this anecdote about an obscure prelate likely to convince skeptics about the reality of premature burial. Perhaps we should allow the Archbishop to finish. That young priest gentleman is the same man who is speaking before you, and who, more than 40 years after that event, the Senate debate in which the Archbishop was participating concerned the urgent need for legislation to forbid burial without the signature of a doctor or officer of health. Even if such a law had been on the French statute book in 1826, it would not have prevented the priest's interment sentence. Despite Bourdelle, this was a case of misdiagnosis of death by doctor. The clergy are overrepresented in unnerving accounts of apparent death. Abbé Rivas, 1697 to 1763, who wrote Manon Lescaut, was found unconscious in the woods and was carried to the house of the village doctor, who proceeded to do a post-mortem examination. Ooh. Hello, Eva. As the scalpel blade cut into the chest, the unfortunate cleric emitted a piercing shriek and promptly died. The incident was quoted in an article on premature burials in the Popular Science Monthly in 1880. The author reports Bouchier, Provost's biographer, as deploring this event as a serious loss to literature. Many since have doubted the truth of this history. Others have argued that, even were the account to be correct, it says more about the criminal haste of the doctor than the intrinsic danger of being buried alive. Even greater doubts have been cast in the authenticity of another autopsy on live priests. The victim this time was Cardinal Diego de Espinosa, the Bishop of Sigüenza and Grand Inquisitor of Spain under Philip II. His second and final death was falsely attributed to the greatest of all anatomists, André Vesalius. It was said by his enemies that Vesalius had mistakenly opened the chest of the cardinal and looked in horror and amazement at the beating heart. This account, which has been uncritically repeated, had its spurious credence to an Elizabethan's judgment that Vesalius was wont to cut men up alive. I think he just thought he was dead and thought, hey, let's check out the heart, and then all of a sudden, oops, looks like this guy's still alive. On one occasion, the scalpel test had an arguably happier outcome. The case is recounted by Julia de Fontenelle in his book Medico-Legal Researches on the Uncertainty of the Signs of Death, published in 1834. A gentleman of Rouen returned from a tour just as his wife was being borne to the tomb, ordered back the coffin, and had a surgeon to make 5 and 20 incisions on the corpse. Oh my goodness. A strange method of cherishing the remnant of existence, if he suspected any. Nevertheless, at the 26th incision, which went deeper than the rest, she mildly inquired, "What mischief are they doing me?" Holy shit, that's gross. The woman survived to bear her husband's 26 children, a pledge for even every gash. So 6 and 20, is that 26? I don't know. If that happened to me, I would not bury you any children. A final clerical example, also from Fontenelle. An abbé died, and for a reason many will understand, his friends decided to bury his cat with him, even though it was still alive. En route to the grave, the vicar awoke, and added to his agony of burial alive was a suffocation caused by his cat curled over his face. The abbé employed all his strength to drive off the incubus. The animal mewed with pain, and more regard being paid to the reminiscence of a cat than those of an archbishop, the procession was stopped and the coffin unscrewed. Out jumped the cat, and immediately after that, the dead man followed and took to his heels. So, this brings us to a point of how common was premature burial. There was a young man in Nunhead who awoke in his coffin of lead. It was cozy enough, he remarked in a huff, but I wasn't aware I was dead. Anonymous Victorian Limerick. That's a pretty good one. So, from our vantage point in the 20th century, it is difficult to judge how realistic was the Victorian sphere of premature burial. Was the man buried at Nunhead Cemetery voicing a legitimate fear of being buried whilst merely moribund rather than definitively deceased? Much maligned Hartman collected more than 700 cases of premature burial, if you can believe that. Holy shittards. What? Crack. Or of narrow escapes from it. Tebb and Vollum in their book talk of 219 narrow escapes, 149 who did not escape, 10 cases of being dissected alive, 3 close shaves on the anatomist's table, and 2 unfortunates who revived whilst in the process of being embalmed. That's so gross. And those were only the cases that were known about. What about the countless thousands whose suffering was never recorded? When the Paris cemetery, Les Innocents, was moved from the center of the city to the suburbs, the sheer number of skeletons found face down in their coffins convinced the lay public and even some medical men that premature burial was common, but most physicians remained skeptical. Dr. David Walsh, writing in 1897, scoffed at the authorities who were fond of stating that 1/3 of the human race was buried alive, and perhaps 1/2 of those who died in their beds are not dead when they are buried. Fuck that. Seriously. Such seemingly gullible was easily satirized. One reviewer, pouring scorn on Fontenelle, compared cemeteries with slaughterhouses and reminded his readers of the story of Saint Fitzstane, who sang one evening masses for the dead in the open air, pronounced the words "Requiescat in peace," and heard a chorus of voices from the surrounding graves respond loudly, "Amen." Even if all the Hartman, Tebb, and Vollum's cases were validated, they would amount to fewer than 1,000, a rather slender counterpoise to the number of victims of passion, gluttony, drugs, and physicians. But yet the zealots persisted and asked disbelievers to provide alternative explanations for phenomenon which they regarded as proof positive of burial alive. I'm going to finish this chapter and then we'll stop at alternative explanations. Consider Madame Blondin, prematurely buried in the 18th century in the Holy Ghost Chapel, Basingstoke. As it happened, the Blondin family vault was situated beneath a boys' school. The day after the funeral, the pupils heard noises. One boy ran off to tell a master, but the pupils received only a thick ear for this trouble. When the noises continued unabated, the sexton was summoned, and the vault was opened just in time to witness her final breath. Resuscitation was unsuccessful. In her agonies, the poor lady had torn frantically at her face and had bitten the nails off her fingers. Or the case of Virginia MacDonald, married in a Brooklyn cemetery in the 1850s. He was buried, not married, sorry. Miss McDonald's mother persisted so long in her belief that her daughter had been buried alive that the authorities finally granted her request that the coffin be raised and opened. To their horror, they discovered the body laying on its side and hands badly bitten, showing every indication of premature burial. Hartman cites a Hungarian buried in 1856, who was exhumed a few days after his interment when noises were heard emanating from his coffin. The fact that he had been buried alive was made evident by the condition of the body and by the wounds which the man had inflicted, biting his shoulders and arms. Guess you could do that. It's not too hard. Flesh wounds, amputated fingers, and torn shrouds were ascribed to the terrors of suffocation rather than ravenous rodents. A still higher dimension of horror is suggested by the birth of a baby to a mother incarcerated alive in a coffin. Madame Bobin sailed in the steamer La Plata from Senegal in 1901 and docked at Pawilac. She was diagnosed as suffering from yellow fever and was subsequently certified dead and then buried. A nurse had lingering doubts and shared them with the lady's father. On exhumation, it was found that the baby had been born in the coffin. The father successfully sued the health officers and was awarded 8,000 lire damages. Or is that pounds? I don't know. It looks like an L with a little thing through it. I don't know if that's lires or pounds. I'm not sure. A similar case was reported in The Undertaker's and Funeral Director's Journal in 1890. Lavrinia Merli, in Montawan peasant, died of hysterics. 2 days after interment, she was discovered turned over in her coffin, having given birth to a baby of 7 months gestation. The case of a soldier, Francis de Seville of Normandy, is the most remarkable of all. Born by cesarean section to a dead mother, who had been exhumed from her coffin when his father returned from a business trip, Francis became an army captain and was wounded in the siege of Rouen, almost certainly that of 1563, and buried alive in a common grave for 7 hours until rescued by his servant, who had intended to dig his master a more fitting grave. Whilst he was recovering his ordeal, Francis, I'm going to say the 15th, IX, like I said, I'm so bad at Roman numerals. IX, is that 15? Or is that 16? I think it's 15. Nope. I don't know. I don't know what the hell it is. Maybe the 4th? I don't know. Soldiers broke into the house and threw de Seville into a dung heap, where he remained buried for 3 days before being rescued a second time and nursed back to health. Could you imagine being buried in shit? Like, what the hell? That is pretty messed up, if I must say so myself. But on that note, boys and girls, we must go to our second music break. On this break, we have Griff from Toronto, Canada, with Let Freedom Ring and Best Life. These are both really good songs, but Let Freedom Ring is one of my favorites. And then we have Chico with They Beyond Me. We got Fluid with I Love It. We got Prime Example, who is featuring our musical host, Mr. Roy Washington, with also Miss Carolyn Giles, Dancing Machine, during this break. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
Freedom!
here's the scoop. You can still be a slave, you're whipped and loop. That's the truth. Got big houses, nice cars, that's real cute. But it doesn't mean nothing, you ain't free to choose. When I say free to choose, no alarm clock, don't gotta hit the snooze. The world is backwards, I'm so confused. They say freedom of speech, but when you speak your mind, they blow a fuse. Just being honest, common sense ain't common. It's kind of ironic, my freedom, I recently bought it. Now I'm a target if I do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. Come on, man, let freedom ring. Yeah. United States become divided states. The world is filled with all kinds of shades, and still resegregate. Parents separate from the children, that's not okay. We should be free to laugh and play. Do it now before you pass away. Fight for what's right, enough for everybody to get a piece of the pie. Brainwash, social media full of lies. Go to work, pay bills, then you die. Need a breakaway, guns, get rid of the AKs. Our ancestors paved way since the slave days, but we still hurting. Carry that burden. Stop playing victim, beat the system. Love is love, it should be shown. Can't grow unless you leave your comfort zone. This I know, I learned all this from the mentorship. Kids don't know what independent is. Take advantage what your parents did. Go against the grid, you have to. Like going to the bathroom, learn the right songs. Cause of Matthew, liberty like statue. They call now the present, cause it's a gift. It should be cherished, last name fearless, not Harris. All thanks to my parents' parents. Now, love the last name every time that I hear it, cause I know what it represents. Climb the fence, so now I got freedom. Such a beautiful thing. Freedom. Such a wonderful thing. Freedom. Such a beautiful thing. Freedom. Such a wonderful thing.
Hit the club, got chose like it's nothing. Mathematician when it come to getting numbers. I'm screaming, one, I feel like money, why? Cause they be on me, 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 why? They be on me, 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 why? I'm like, look up in the sky, that's a bird, no, that's a plane. Chico just that fly, so make it splurge and make it rain. I keep that Scrabble mind, I got words and I got game. And she like circle goggles, she got curves and she got frame. And if mama a rider, I'ma swerve all in her lane. She give me gobble gobble, she superb with that good brain. Now baby, bout that action, make them birds drive me insane. I'm a jigger, low in action, mama purchase this good thing. And fire y'all employees, you dealing with a boss.
and kick it with a player. I got juice and I got sauce. You messing with them losers, I feel sorry for your loss. I'm a heartthrob, baby, I can feel your beating pulse. GQ, so you know this player's done. Hit the club, got chose like it's none. Mathematician when it come and getting numbers. I'm screaming, one, I feel like money, why? Cause they be on me, 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 why? They be on me, 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 why? Juice daddy, baby, looky here, looky here. Milwaukee bought them bucks, fear the deer, fear the deer. I'm feeling like a player, must be peer, must be peer. So let me drop this knowledge in your ear, in your ear. I'm driving your chick crazy, let me steal, let me steal. She crying like a baby, I see tears, I see tears. She thick from the front, I see rear, I see rear. I see me in them panties, I see mirror, I see mirror. Fly guy, baby, you messing with a pilot. King of the ship, you messing with a pirate. Ding dong ditch, make her open, then I'm out it. I'm getting all in that belly, turned her into a Audi. GQ, so you know this player's done. Hit the club, got chose like it's none. Mathematician when it come and getting numbers. I'm screaming, one, I feel like money, why? Cause they be on me, 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 why? They be on me, 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 why?
Care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Do you and live your best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Where you from? Who you with? Are you a blood? Are you equipped? I do my thing, stay legit. In this world, no one's innocent. VIP, get bottles. One snap of my fingertips. See these haters like blah blah blah, blah 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 blah, talking gibberish. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Do you and live your best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Rolling and rolling and rolling SUV. Rolling and rolling and rolling with my homies. Rolling and rolling and rolling SUV. Rolling and rolling and rolling with my homies.
I'm going to live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm going to live my best life. Do you live your best life? Do you live your best life? Do you live your best life? I'm going to live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm going to live my best life. Do you live your best life? Do you live your best life? Do you live your best life?
I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Do you and live your best life. Don't care if my head ain't right.
my left hand. I'm ballin', making buckets back to back like I was Stephan. Better yet, I'm Philip Jackson, so don't treat me like the next man. And I'm kind of a real big deal, so don't be out here second guessing. Anyway, I make my pay and live this California lifestyle. Sunshine, loud packs, and chicks that love to get wild. That's how we do it every day. Slipping, sliding through the traffic on a mission for the day. Clearing marks about my way. Really got no time for y'all today. And all the craziness y'all talk, but never get your story straight. See me out here living great. I don't give a about all that hate. And when it comes to kicking game, I give you all that you can take. Trying to do it big, got no complaints. Every morning eating steak. They say I'm wrong for showing out, but I'ma do it anyway. Trustin' thing ain't nothing, bitch, cause I can do it any day. And it don't matter where I go, I always represent the yay. I'm so in love with this lifestyle. Anything I want, I say the word, I get it right now. Boppers used to hate me, now they tell me I'm a tight now. Swagger through the roof, got everybody on my height now. So in love with this lifestyle. I love it, and I love it, and I love it. So in love with this lifestyle. Anything I want, I say the word, I get it right now. See me, I'm out here getting it and loving how I live. Best believe if I do something, I'm a stupid, do it big. And this hustling is my gig, so don't you ask me what I stand for. Stacking while I'm macking, trying to earn myself a couple Lambos. Yeah, you know them toys for them big boys. Emperor of sorts and all you other players decoys. Meaning you're not the real deal. Keep an appetite for dollars that I never miss a meal. All you suckers need to chill. I'm just trying to stack a meal and pull the baddest bras around and let us show they sex appeal. Little bit of Netflix, then we chill. Lose them clothes, keep on them heels. Working like a 9 to 5 and go right back to chasing skrill. I bring that real, never that phony. BS, y'all be stressing, put it down just like an OG. Perform these cookies, take flight. Some of y'all just out here acting. I'm a boss in real life. I'm so in love with this lifestyle. Anything I want, I say the word, I get it right now. Boppers used to hate me, now they tell me I'm a tight now. Swagger through the roof, got everybody on my height now. So in love with this lifestyle. I love it, and I love it, and I love it. So in love with this lifestyle. Anything I want, I say the word, I get it right now. Keep it more 100 than a C note. Hall of Fame spitting, representing with these pimp quotes. Don't try to front, you know this shit's dope. Question is, will I ever fail? My answer is no. I make this hustling look amazing. Put it down, doper than a blunt of purple hazing. Spicy on the mic, I bring the fire like a Cajun. Scoville's making haters sweat when I be blazing. Leaning to the side, haters everywhere. Yeah, I hear them talking, but they simply wasting air. Can't understand the reason that they stay in my affairs, but I'm major with my movements, getting money everywhere. I'm so in love with this lifestyle. Anything I want, I say the word, I get it right now. Boppers used to hate me, now they tell me I'm a tight now. Swagger through the roof, got everybody on my height now. So in love with this lifestyle. I love it, and I love it, and I love it. So in love with this lifestyle. Anything I want, I say the word, I get it right now. I love it, so in love with this lifestyle. I love it, and I love it, and I love it. So in love with this lifestyle. Anything I want, I say the word, I get it right now.
My perfume on, then I grab dance your pants off. I really love it how your body's so soft. Dance all night, little lady, it's your call. Step, 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 baby, follow my lead. You and me showing off for the club to see. No time to get rest, we doing our thing. Cha-cha, then we dip, top it off with a spin. Glide across the floor, let's do it again. By the way, little mama, can we be friends? I can't let this night just end. I really wanna know if I can see you again. Give me your number, we'll get back on the scene. We can hit another club if that's your thing. We'll be partners in crime, you and me, as we ripping up floors like two dancing machines.
Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us once again on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. We finished one book, which was Real Hauntings by Mr. Hans Holzer, and then we went to death with Mr. Robert Wilkins, and all the different things that plague us as human beings as we do fear death, as we are all dying from the time we were born. Oh my goodness, that was a pretty intriguing book. Like, I was pretty interested in that. And yet, here we are at Reddit Ghost Stories for the last and third hour. So, I hope you guys do indeed enjoy this. I'm thinking I might turn that up, but I don't think so. I think that's about the right instance where we should be. So let me know in the chat rooms if the music is too loud. As it sounds okay over here, but a lot of things sound okay over here when they're not in the perspective of the listening world. But yes, I'm super excited to continue on our third hour. So this one is a Reddit ghost story, and it's called Masking, and it's by u/JSunshine21. Hello. I recently went over to a friend's house to investigate some phenomenons that have been happening at her apartment. She thinks it has been her Nona, but I warned her it could be something else. I walked in, brought my spirit box and SLS camera. There was definitely someone there, but I couldn't make out if it was a good or bad spirit. As I was explaining what the devices were, my friend was about to say her Nona's name, but I warned her to stop. If you come across a spirit and it's acting friendly, someone who lost someone would think, oh, it's my grandfather or something along those lines. You never want to say the person you lost's name, or even think it. Other spirits can blurt out the exact name, but really, they are not friendly and will attach or drain your energy. After I told her this, I told her a story about my great-grandfather, specifically stating their name 3 minutes later. If I asked the person in the room with us, what is your name? Albert. My great-grandfather's name, I looked at her and said, there is your evidence right there. How do I know that that's not your great-grandfather? He and I are not on speaking terms. We got into a little fight. He went away for a while, so I knew it could not. Also, some of you might think, oh, it could actually be the spirit's name. The way it was said and how it continued with the conversation based on what I told my friend about my great-grandfather, I definitely knew it was not, so please be careful what you say out loud or think next time you are trying to communicate with spirits. A better thought would be, may I have your name? Can I ask who I'm speaking to? Something along those lines. So you guys stay safe out there, because definitely, there are spirits out there that want to gain your trust by acting, 1, like a child, or 2, like somebody that you are attached to, that you miss, that has passed on to the other side. This one is by you/Ballsucker2003. This is a story from my dad that he told me a few years ago, and I asked if I could share it on this sub, and he agreed. For context, this was around the late 80s in the UK, and my dad was visiting a place called Cullingham Castle for a school trip. As some of you may or may not know, castles around the UK are known for being quite haunted, and Cullingham is not an exception. However, the experience my dad had is quite different to anything I've heard of before. There is a courtyard in the center of the castle, and my dad's tour group had been shown around it previously and had begun to move on to another area of the castle. However, my dad had managed to misplace his hat and assumed that he left it in the courtyard. After telling his teacher, he split off from the group to return to the courtyard and entered it. He quickly spotted his hat on the ground and grabbed it, but when he raised his head up to stand, the courtyard walls were coated completely in dark red blood. The blood oozed down the walls slowly and quite literally was everywhere on every single wall, even the windows. Obviously terrified, he ran straight out of the courtyard and back to the tour group as fast as possible and told a few of his mates, but none of them believed him. The group briefly passed near the courtyard again, and when my dad looked, all the blood had disappeared completely. He said that he swears to this day it happened, but has no idea how or why. Does anyone know of any familiar stories? So other people are saying they don't, but they have this one and that one and yada yada. So we'll move on to the next. This one is by you/APC1900. Aunt Jane comes for a visit. This happened when I was 6 years old. I'm a female and 27 now. My aunt had passed away from cancer a year prior to this incident. I was playing in my brother's room with some blocks. I was sitting on the floor, right next door, the door which was open and led to our hallway. I sensed someone walking past the room, and at first I figured it was my mom. When I looked up, I realized it was not. It was my Aunt Jane, wearing a white nightgown. She may have passed away in that, but I'm not sure. She was holding a candle of some kind in front of her as she walked slowly past the doorway down the hall. I was honestly not even scared. I loved my aunt, and she was very spiritual. I waited a moment before getting up and looking down the hallway, which led to a window. She was gone, but there was a bright light outside the window. It almost looked like a star in the distance, but I wouldn't have been able to see them from that window. Not really a creepy story, but it was nice to see her. This one is by you/academic_. Pudding 25. I think I inherited my grandma's pet ghost. My great-grandmother was a bit of a spooky lady. She passed away when I was 11 years old, but I remember she always told stories about a ghost that she said lived with her named Boo. She said that he had been with her and followed her to several different houses with her since she was a child. She even said that Boo would come and visit with her, and they would talk and have full conversations and stuff. She said he was just a regular-looking guy that was thin and wore a black hat. He wasn't scary-looking at all.
Dad just was eating an apple and there was a big black slug in it and we took a bite of it.
Okay. I can't do anything. I'm doing my show right now, so you need to leave. Please. I'm sorry. He's an adult. He can take care of himself. Her stories were always well known amongst our family and fairly lighthearted. She blamed everything on Boo, and we all were used to her always talking about him, and we all laughed about it and never thought much about it. We all just thought she was making stuff up to entertain us, I guess. Thankfully, none of us ever saw or heard Boo, only her. It was just a joke in our family. We all loved listening to Boo stories. When my great-grandma passed away, my grandmother, her daughter, said that Boo came to live with her. Again, we all just thought it was a running joke and laughed about her stories. She would tell about Boo making noises and moving stuff around and hiding stuff from her. She eventually started talking about how Boo would come and visit with her too, and they would talk to each other. Again, no one really, where did it go? Sorry, I'm kind of like discombobulated about this slug in a apple story, but no one really thought she was serious. It was just a ongoing family joke, I thought. Well, my grandma passed away before Christmas, just this last year, and I've been living in her old house since the beginning of the year. Since I've been here, I've heard loud banging like something falling, coming from the other rooms, but when I go to see what fell, nothing is out of place. This has happened almost every night since I've been here. On the nights when I have company sleep over, nothing strange ever happens. It only happens when I'm alone here. I've heard what sounds like someone hitting the wall. No one is there. I've had my keys, makeup, clothes, beauty products just disappear and then show back up later, where they were supposed to be. I've gotten to where I just talk out loud and say, "Boo, please return this and this or that and that." And the noise will stop, or I'll find what I was looking for. I'm not scared, but it's just totally outside of my comfort zone. However, I'm pretty apprehensive about it, and the thought of him visiting me and being able to see him. I don't think I want that to happen, and it makes me a bit nervous to think about. I haven't said anything much to my family about it because I don't want them to think I'm crazy. So I just stay silent mostly, but I've started making little jokes about Boo doing stuff and him pulling pranks. My family just laughs at me though, just like I always laughed at both my grandmothers. Laugh out loud. This one is by you /agile_eggplant_5198. So last night I was having the weirdest dream ever, and I half woke up and I was having sleep paralysis, and something was repeatedly scratching my neck over and over. It still burns. Keep in mind, I only live with my boyfriend, who is 21, and my daughter, who is 1 year old. And we all share a bed, and I was on the edge, and my back was facing away from them. What could cause this? Does anyone have any answers for me? And then she edits and says, I forgot to mention I have no scratch marks, but it burns and feels like I do, but I don't. So I think, like, as long as you don't have scratch marks that appear, it's okay. It's more of like a mind fuck, if you want to call it that. But if they do appear, then be worried. I've had something scratch me before when I was doing the Dylan Red Wine case, and something followed me home, and I did get scratched, and luckily I had holy water in a spray bottle. First time I sprayed, went away within 5 minutes. Second time it happened, it took at least 20 minutes to go away, but yeah, it's pretty scary when that happens. But don't let it get in your head. Like, it's more of a mental thing. This one is by you/Maccored, Maccored. Ghosts and the Dying. When my dad was dying, he was very much not moving a lot or saying much, and had been like that for days. It was only ourselves in the room when he suddenly sat up, seemingly quite happy, and started talking to his mother. I asked him if he was okay and what was going on, and he told me both his parents were there. He apparently talked to his deceased sister last before passing away the following day. About 4 years ago, a relation of mine, my aunt, was dying in the hospital. Her 3 sons had visited and were staying locally as their mother wasn't going to last much longer, and they were all married and had moved away from their hometown. Unfortunately, overnight, one of the sons actually passed away tragically. It was decided that they wouldn't tell my aunt as she was too near death as it was. Seconds before my aunt passed away, she looked into the corner of the room quizzically, and in a confused tone called out her recently deceased son's name. It was as if she could see him, waiting for her, but yet didn't understand why he was there in spirit rather than in person. The family liked to think he was waiting for her. This one is by you/CampSpooky_podcast, a playmate from the other side. Hello there. Excuse my typos, but I'm just excited to join a paranormal community. For context, I'm an only child. My first encounter was when I was 5 years old in my bedroom. My bedroom was located in the far part of the house. Of course, my bedroom was pretty much secluded. My bed was one of those old spring mattresses that made sounds every time you moved, and was placed against the wall in the far corner of my room. Make sure you remember these details. Mysterious indent. To set the scene, it was the night before my first day of kindergarten, and I was awake late at night. Not from excitement, just because I had insomnia before my parents even knew. It was around 3 a.m. and I was watching Adult Swim. My parents were pretty much hippies, so practically no restrictions on TV. And while I'm laying down, I hear my mattress creaking. I just remember thinking that it was odd because I didn't move at all to make a noise. Without moving, I shift my eyes down to the end of my mattress to see literally indentation on the edge. A butt indent. You would think, being a 5-year-old girl, I would have been so scared and run to my parents' bedroom. Wrong! I don't know why, but I wasn't scared. I was chill and figured whatever this thing was, just liked watching TV too. I realized that after a couple of episodes of Family Guy, I should probably get to sleep before school, and I sat up, looked at the indent in my bed and said, I need to go to bed for school in the morning. You can stay if you want, but I have to turn the TV off. The indent slowly lifted as if they were getting up from my bed, and I felt its presence disappear. So what did I do? Well, as an unbothered 5-year-old, I went to sleep and had that night in the back of my head. I didn't know what a ghost or anything paranormal was. I know that a few weeks passed and I hadn't seen it since, but I started to sleepwalk after that night. I'd sleepwalk everywhere in the house, but I frequently would sleepwalk into my parents' room, open their closet door, enter, and face toward their bed. That's so creepy. Don't ask me why, because I didn't even know this occurred until my family members and my parents would ask me. I was very small and had hair that went past my butt. It was giving Cousin It / grudge vibes for sure. My tia even said that one time she slept over at our house and remembers waking up to me facing toward her while she slept on the couch. Creepy. Although this would occur when I was asleep during the daytime, I would come home from school and be babysat by my grandparents in the afternoon, and my younger cousin would be dropped off a few hours later. Usually, I would stay away from the back of the house until it was time to sleep. One day, I was going to use the restroom, and the only sunlight that lit the hallway would come from the bottom of the door. As I walked down the hallway, I see a shadow as if it stepped in front of the door. I knew this wasn't anyone in my household because my grandparents were usually busy in the front of the house. I calmly made a U-turn and forgot about having to pee. I thought that if this thing wasn't going anywhere, then maybe we could be friends and play. Could you tell me, or tell that I am an only child? Laugh out loud. I'd close all the doors in the hallway and sit by my parents' door with my Simba stuffed animal that also rattled. Asked to play with me, slide my Simba to the opposite end, and it would slide back. I was so excited to have a friend to play with. This happened up until I moved to California with my mom. I never told anybody about my friend, later to learn that my uncle slept in my room around the World Cup games, and my friend spooked my uncle out 3 times within a couple hours. Ever since then, when I visit my dad in Texas, I don't feel welcomed in my room. I'm not sure why, but it feels like I'm being watched and overall in a bubble. And what's even more messed up is that my Simba has disappeared and it's nowhere to be found, and I still sleepwalk. I'm 22 years old now. Since my first paranormal encounter, I've experienced so many paranormal encounters to the point where I can at times see and hear people who aren't there, things flying across rooms in a home I grew up in, and so much more. Says, if you made it this far, thank you for reading my experience. Did you have a playmate from the other side? Not really. I saw a lot of shit from the other side, but never really had a playmate. This is by you/Paulo Delaney. Ghost animal. My daughter, Kat, and I were at our little country house for vacations. It's a wonderful, secluded place, and usually at night, we watch together some Netflix series or movies we've downloaded before. So there we were, night pitch black, enjoying a great movie when we felt something quite heavy jump on the bed just near our feet. My daughter calls the cat, but I tell her he's been in my arms the whole time. So she turns on a lamp and there was nothing. We looked under the bed and all over the place, still nothing. We decided to joke around saying it was a possum and just forgot about it. But it was weird that we both felt it so clearly. That is super creepy. And the point where you look under the bed is like, right round. I don't know. That part really scares me. these stories are so short. So I'm just gonna skip them because we need something with some girth, something thick, something good. Something that's gonna capture our imaginations. So this one's by u/MortyClone1. Menacing Memory. I was about 15 years old, living in a rented house with my mum. My bedroom was at the front of the house and my bed had 2 mattresses on it. A spring mattress on the bottom and a soft foam mattress on top. My bed was positioned on the outer corner wall under the window. I woke up one night for no particular reason, but felt uneasy in this heavy, quiet sensation. In the corner of the room, diagonally opposite my bed in the corner of the inner walls of the room, something was clinging to the ceiling and walls. It was almost completely transparent, but the light was distorted, bending around the curvatures and edges of its form. It was humanoid in shape, devoid of features. It hung there in the top right-hand corner of the opposite wall, as if it had its back pressed into the corner, and its feet and hands were up beside its body, sort of like how Spider-Man might hang at such a spot, though I'm not sure I'd seen any Spider-Man content. This was 20 years ago, and I did not read comics. It had been there watching me sleep. When it saw I was awake, it started moving along the top of the far wall, closer to my bed. Then it started along the ceiling towards me. It didn't move its limbs. It was more like it hovered along its path. I was paralyzed with fear, and my heart was racing. This thing came across the ceiling until it was directly above me, and then slowly descended over me, and my mattress sunk down with the weight of it, where its limbs pressed down into the mattress on both sides of me, as if it was on all fours, leaning down into my face. All I could do was squeeze my eyes shut and turn my face away, screaming in my head over and over again for this thing to go away. Only a few moments later, everything returned to normal. I heard ambient sound return, waves from the nearby ocean, and the wind outside. I could pull my blanket up, so it mustn't have been on my bed anymore. Without even opening my eyes, I didn't want to see if it was still there. I pulled the blanket up over my head and stayed there under the blanket. My mom's cat, who doesn't like me, came and hopped up onto my bed and laid down on my chest to sleep, which was very unusual. This bears a lot of hallmarks of sleep paralysis, and as an adult, I found out my brother suffered with sleep paralysis a lot as a child, but didn't know what was happening. This whole experience was extremely vivid and malevolent, though, and to this day, it's kept me guessing about what happened that night. It's been 20 years. This one is by u/Chronic Authorities. I heard her say, uh-oh. Somehow this thing again. Weird. So this, much like my incident with the ghost of the Civil War nurse, isn't going to be some grand epic. It isn't going to be some, and then I saw a ghost type of thing. I honestly wish it was, as those things make for better retellings, and they're harder to dispute. Anyway, for a bit of a backstory, I live in a small southern city with history dating back to the Civil War. The apartment building I call home, and have called home for almost 4 years now, was built in 1936 to be apartments. Instead of existing as a house first, only to then be converted into apartments. The walls and floors in this place are tremendously paper thin, as I can hear my downstairs neighbor's TV, and my downstairs neighbor if she's talking loud enough. There's squirrels in the wall that I can hear scrabbling from time to time, and I can hear every time the front door opens and shuts, generally because people slam it. I say all that to say, yes, I know there's rational, logical explanations for all sorts of things. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for the heavy footsteps I sometimes hear in my downstairs neighbor's apartment, which sounds like she puts on her heaviest pair of hiking boots, which I would be surprised if she owns and paces, doing her best to stomp heavily with every step. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for the knocking I'll hear sometimes on the bathroom wall, which sounds very much like my other neighbor is rapping his knuckles against his side of the wall. I'm even sure there's a logical explanation for the shadow of the arm I'm sure I saw in my dark kitchen, once and only once back in 2020, staring at it as I was from the living room. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for any and all creepy things that have happened while I've lived here. I can find no explanation for this part, and this was about a week ago. I was about to go to sleep, sitting on the couch. I sleep on my couch because the living room is the only room I can somewhat climate control, be it through heaters or fans. I'm playing some solitaire to sort of relax. It was a particularly noisy evening that night. The train was whistling and groaning as it made its way down the tracks. The squirrels were scrabbling in the walls, and I could hear one of my neighbors moving around. In truth, I was a little unnerved by all the noise, but then, in the midst of everything else, I hear it. Uh-oh. It was a small voice, toneless, either a young woman or a child. It wasn't muffled. It didn't sound like it was coming from a TV or from one of my neighbors. It sounded like it was coming from the kitchen or my bedroom. I stopped, paralyzed, listening, and hear nothing. Ever since then, I've heard nothing else and have no explanation for it. There's no grand ghost story attached to this. The only thing that comes close to being half remembered from this story from the old landlord about some little girl going missing here at some point. Even he hadn't heard about it himself, had only heard about it from a woman doing research for a ghost walk. It could be nothing, and I probably won't even hear anything else, just like the Civil War nurse at my college. But I know what I heard. I know what it wasn't, even if I don't know what it was. That's what counts, right? This one is by you / lowercase x, uppercase x, underscore Lulu, L-E-L-E-W, underscore, uppercase x, lowercase x. The knocks on my closet. I was once very tired, and I did what I was supposed to do. I turned my computer on, and then I played some relaxing music from YouTube. And then I heard knocks twice, and it looks like it came from my closet. I looked at my windows to see if it was a bird who knocked because the window was behind the closet. And then I checked, and there was no bird. It was really big knocks, like someone knocking on the door. I ignored the sound because I didn't care. My house is haunted. And what is so scary for me to run away? I always hear something anyway. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes there's just like predominant noises. This is from the same person, I believe. And it's called There's a Ghost in My Room. I don't know how to start with the story, but I was once in the hallway fighting with my brother, and then after that I go back to my room with this type of the mood, mad as a snake. I call my mom on her mobile phone, and then she asked me what happened. Why are you mad? I said I got in a fight with my brother, and then I yell on into my mom's face, and then I hang up on the phone, because I was mad as a snake. Then I heard a deep breath after the ghost talk, and she said to me, "Shut up, fat and ugly." From her voice, she looks like a young female, 12 years old. How did she know I am fat? I looked at my phone to see if I still had the phone. I saw my phone and there was nothing at all, and I got so scared, so very scared. I never believed in ghosts or their existence, and I always read about them a lot from people saying that they do exist. Then I said to my mom, "Mom, how does this book mention everything about ghosts that are around us when I don't see any of them? Now I believe ghosts exist." So I had to kind of reword this story because it was very, very broken English. But yeah, I hope you guys understood it. This one is by you/chronic authorities. Weeping Woman. So, I've mentioned before how my town has a lot of Civil War history. This despite the small hang-up that only a few buildings actually managed to survive the war. The rest were torn down to build barricades along the river, as the town itself changed hands on more than one occasion. One of the few remaining buildings in question is an old bank, technically the oldest in the state. Though not the oldest operating one, it was built in 1833, but almost immediately went bankrupt and now bankless bank serving as everything from a private residence to a hospital during the war before finally managing to actually be used as a bank again, though even that wouldn't last very long. As a museum now, and one not too far removed from where I live, close enough that I'll walk to it sometimes. I'm friendly with the people who run it and have given some tours to friends who have dragged down there, so I've dragged them down there. There's a few ghost stories associated with the bank, though arguably the most famous is that of the Weeping Woman, a woman who had one son go fight for the North and the other for the South. Both sons ended up dying, and though they died in different days in different battles, news reached the women of their deaths on the same day. There's a mirror in the downstairs portion of the bank that's actually originally from the bank when it was first built. It's used a lot now for prom and wedding pictures, and supposedly every once in a while, a picture will get ruined by the addition of a person in the mirror, a woman dressed all in black. I wish I could say that I have a picture of the woman and that this story is about the circumstances around that picture, but unfortunately I don't. There is another part of that ghost story, though, that sometimes the woman can be heard weeping over the deaths of her sons. I was in the museum about 4 months ago, showing it to a friend of mine, and had dropped back while the lady who normally oversaw it was explaining something to another couple of guests. I'm standing there, listening, and then I hear it. It sounded distinctly like a woman openly weeping, coming from somewhere just a little ways away. I thought it might have been outside, but then someone opened the door, and the noise didn't get any louder. Glancing over at my friend, it was clear he didn't hear anything, and after a while, the noise went away. No one else in that building heard it, though the lady in charge had told me several stories about unusual things happening to her. Plates breaking, small noises, all sorts of things. A couple of months passed, and then during the Christmas celebration at the bank, I heard the woman telling the story of the Weeping Woman to a couple people who had asked about ghosts. I got to be part of that story as I leaned in and told them that I myself had heard it. I've yet to hear it again, even as I've gone back to try, but I know what I heard. There is a ghost story around that old bank, and I am now part of it. So that is basically the end of our time, boys and girls. thank you so much again for joining us on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Tomorrow night, we're going to do a show where we're trying to fundraise for the Reality Orphanage. These kids are so beautiful. They're having their back-to-school fundraiser, and it's going to be epic, and Mr. Troy Bacon is going to join us. So I really hope you guys can join us for that. And I'm going to repeat myself, as I generally do. But I want to thank you guys so much for joining me this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. And I also want to thank all of our friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, KPNL Radio, Twitter, Twitch, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, YouTube, wherever you may be watching or listening this evening beyond the Omniverse. I had a wonderful time, and I can't wait to do it again tomorrow night, where I said we have Mr. Troy Bacon, and then we have Mr. Samuel Kasongo. Let me double check that real quick. And he's the guy that could be Kasonga Samuel. He's the guy that runs the orphanage. Sorry, I'm so bad with names, so I have to look it up really quick. Where the hell did he go? Holy shit. Yes, Kasongo Samuel. So make sure you join Kasongo Samuel, Troy Bacon, and I as we go over Reality Orphanage. They need money for food, they need money for back to school, and I don't mind donating every month just because, you know, to me that's like my tithing, my thing. But you guys, don't forget, we're all in this together. Together we can make the world a little better, and together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. Please take care of my yous, my gentle people, and I will see you back here, same time, same place.